We have one more key idea that we need to learn to identify, and it is known as the theme. The theme of a literary text, such as a story, poem, or play, is the key message or lesson that the author is trying to communicate in telling the story. Now, with works of literature, oftentimes the theme is not going to be directly stated. So as we recall from earlier lessons, when something is not directly stated, we need to do some reading detective work. And in this case, we are going to make an inference or educated guess about what point the author is trying to get across. Specifically, what is the theme or lesson that the author wants us to learn from this story? So to identify the theme, you're going to look for specific details in the passage, and within literary text, those details are going to be our story elements, such as the characterization, the plot, the solution, or the setting. So we need to be able to identify those and use them to help us make a determination about what is the author trying to teach us. Once we have made our inference, we then need to take it and apply it to the wider world. And what that means is, what is the life lesson that I need to learn here? To help us understand what theme is, let's take a look at a brief example. The Unhappy Princess. Once there was a king who had a daughter named Princess Araminta. He loved her greatly, and he wanted to make her happy more than anything in the world. He bought her a fine steed, but she didn't like to ride. He bought her beautiful and expensive clothing, but Araminta said that the gold embroidery scratched at her neck. He bought a grand palace in the mountains to be their summer home, but Araminta thought the empty stone hallways felt drafty and lonely. The king couldn't understand. He'd given his daughter everything that made him happy: a fine horse, nice clothes, and a beautiful palace. What else could you possibly want, he asked her. Araminta didn't have an answer for him because she didn't know. One day she was wandering near a creek by herself, watching the little silver fish dart around in the water. She saw an abandoned fishing pole leaning against a tree. Impulsively, she hooked a worm to the hook and then cast the fishing rod into the water. She sat there on a rock by the creek for hours as she fished, enjoying the warm sunshine on her skin. When she caught a trout, she shouted with joy. "Father, would you buy me a fishing pole?" Araminta asked her father later that day. "Well, that's easy enough, but I don't understand," the king said. "How could a fishing pole possibly make you happy?" Araminta simply smiled. "You don't have to understand," she said. So based on the information in this passage, which of the following best describes the main theme or lesson of the story? Is it different things make different people happy, or is it fishing is more relaxing than horseback riding? Well, let's consider what happens in the story. So as we begin, this king wants nothing more than to make his daughter, Princess Araminta, happy. And he goes and he buys her all these things, but she's not really thrilled with him. There's different things about each of them that she just doesn't like. It doesn't make her happy. But there is one statement that is telling, that really provides us with the majority of the information that we need to identify the theme in this story. And that statement is, he'd given his daughter everything that made him happy. Look at that again. He'd given his daughter everything that made who happy? Him, the king. What makes the king happy? Well, things like horseback riding. Said he bought her a fine steed, but she didn't like to ride. Beautiful and expensive clothing makes him happy. Did it make her happy? No. A grand palace in the mountains to be their summer home. It made him happy, but did it make Princess Araminta happy? No. So further down the story, the father states, I've done all of these things for you. What makes you happy? What could you possibly want? And it said that Araminta didn't have an answer for him because she didn't know. Well, finally, she discovers something that she enjoys doing. On accident, she finds a fishing pole and decides to give it a shot and loves it. Now that she has experienced something that truly makes her happy, that truly gives her enjoyment, she now is able to go to her father and say, if you want to give me something, I want a fishing pole. The king says, it's easy. Sure, I can do that, but I don't understand why. And she responds, you don't have to understand. Why didn't he have to understand? Because it wasn't about making him happy. This was something that made her happy. So based on the information in the text, we see that our first option, different things make different people happy, is the lesson that the author wants us to learn from this passage. Because the things that made the king happy didn't make Princess Araminta happy. But the one thing she found that did make her happy made no sense to the king. So just because something makes me happy, it's something that I enjoy doing, doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that you would enjoy doing. So the lesson that we need to learn is that different things make different people happy. The second one does not really provide the lesson to learn because it says fishing is more relaxing than horseback riding. Well, Araminta agrees with this because fishing makes her happy. The king, on the other hand, is more happy if he is horseback riding. He doesn't understand why fishing will make Princess Araminta happy. So there's no way that it could be the second. So the author wants us to learn that different things make different people happy. Let's work through a couple more examples to see if we can determine the theme of a story based on the details within each passage. Tryouts. Kayla tried to ignore her sore throat and stuffy nose. She was trying out for the soccer team, and Coach Markham would pick only the 20 best players. Kayla sipped from her water bottle while she waited to do practice drills. She sneezed, and then Coach Markham signaled her to start. First, Kayla had to run across the field as fast as she could. She took off, but her stuffy nose made it hard to breathe. When she reached the end of the field, she felt dizzy, and her head was swimming a little. She hoped the coach hadn't noticed. Next, she and another girl had to compete for control of the soccer ball. The other girl quickly stole the ball from Kayla. Kayla was surprised. She was usually good at this. For the first time, she worried that she might not make the team. Kayla struggled through the other drills too. At the end of the tryout, she felt terrible and left as soon as she could. A few days later, Kayla had recovered from her cold. She was still worried about her performance at the tryout, but maybe it wasn't too late to do something about it. Kayla went to see Coach Markham. She explained that she hadn't done her best because of her cold. Coach Markham listened patiently and agreed to let Kayla join the team for the first practice. That was all Kayla wanted. She knew she would be a valuable member of the team. She just needed a chance to prove it. So which of the following best describes the main theme or lesson of the story? is that no one likes to hear excuses, or sometimes it pays to ask for a second chance. If we look at the details in the story, what is going on? So we have the character Kayla, who is trying out for the soccer team. How did her tryout go? Well, based on the information in the passage, during the tryout, she was fighting a cold. She had a stuffy nose. She was having difficulty breathing, difficulty concentrating. So her tryout didn't go too well. Afterwards, it said that she felt horrible about it. So she went home, and once she got to a point where she started feeling better, she was like, I really want to be on the team. And I don't want this cold to be the deciding factor that I don't have what it takes to be on the team. So she goes and makes the decision to explain to the coach what was going on. Well, the coach agreed to basically allow her to try out with the first practice. Then, if he sees that she does well, he'll tell her, go ahead and keep coming to practice. But it says that was all Kayla wanted. She knew she would be a valuable member of the team. She just needed she needed a chance to prove it. Our first option, is there anything in this story that shows us that what the author is trying to teach here is that no one likes to hear excuses? There's nothing in the text that indicates that. As a matter of fact, it says that when Kayla went to see Coach Markham, she explained she hadn't done her best because of her cold. And it said that Coach Markham listened patiently and agreed to let Kayla join the team for the first practice. So if he listened patiently, did that mean that he didn't want to hear any excuses from her? No, so that obviously is not our choice. The second one, sometimes it pays to ask for a second chance, is the lesson that we need to learn. Because when Kayla goes and explains what had happened, the coach agreed to let her join the team for the initial practice. That was all Kayla wanted. So did it pay for her to ask for a second chance? Yes. And that is what the author wants us to learn. If we make a mistake or something does not work out well, maybe we're not on our A game, sometimes it does pay to say, hey, will you give me another shot at this? That's the lesson that the author wants us to learn. Let's look at one more example from a passage titled Starry Night to see if we can determine the main theme of the story. What do we do now? Asked Gavin. It was his first time camping, and he expected a long, boring night. He and Eric had finished dinner, and it was only 6:30. Just hang out, said Eric. Eric had been going camping for years. Look at the sky. Sometimes you can see a shooting star, he said. Gavin looked up. The stars were clear and bright. It was like being in a planetarium. See that really bright one over there? That's the North Star, Eric told him. And there's the Little Dipper. Right next to it is the Big Dipper. Cool idea, Gavin said. What other constellations do you know? Huh, I guess that's it. A lot of them come from Greek myths, but I don't remember them, said Eric. Well, I'll make up my own then, said Gavin. See over there? That's the buffalo. You're right, agreed Eric. See those 3 stars over there? That's the tent. And that bunch of stars, that's the mosquito, Gavin said, pointing. Eric squinted. That's a stretch, he said, but why not? Now we just need a myth. Gavin thought about it. 2 great hunters were tracking a buffalo, he began, but they came to a swamp where the great mosquito lived. Eric and Gavin took turns adding to the story. They were so focused on myth-making that by the time Gavin checked his watch, it was already 9:45. Since the air was mild and the sky cloudless, they unrolled their sleeping bags outside their tent. Gavin sighed happily as he closed his eyes, his brain still buzzing with new ideas for Constellation stories. So what best describes the main theme or lesson of the story? Is it time passes quickly when you make your own fun? Or not everyone likes the same things you do? Well, if we consider what's going on in the story, we know that Gavin, we're told, is camping for the very first time, and he's expecting that this trip's going to be very boring. So Eric starts sharing what he knows about constellations just by looking up in the night sky. And as time goes on, Gavin starts asking him about the other stars as well. What other constellations do you know? And then that story continues on, that they start making up their own constellations and making their own myths. Well, this begins at 6:30, and by the time that they get done, it's 9:45. It's like the time just went by rather quickly. Now, when we consider this, which main theme or lesson makes the most sense? Time passes quickly when you make your own fun, or not everyone likes the same things you do? Well, we do know that Gavin is camping for the first time, but do we get the indication that he doesn't like it? The only thing that we are told is that he is expecting it to be boring, but it doesn't say that he doesn't like it. However, when they start making up their own myths and making up their own stories for the constellations that they made up, it's quite obvious that they're having fun with it. So what happens when you have fun? When you do something that you enjoy? You lose track of time. So here, they're spending 3 hours and 15 minutes talking about constellations and making up stories about them. So the lesson that we learn from this passage is that time passes quickly when you make your own fun. Before we close out this lesson, let's practice identifying a theme based on a quotation from a text. Our first quotation states, "Knowledge is the fruit of wisdom, to be eaten carefully and digested fully, unlike that lunch you were bolting down, little friend." So what theme best matches that quotation? You must learn new things slowly and thoughtfully, or the power of a tool lies in its user. Well, if we consider that it states knowledge is the fruit of wisdom to be eaten carefully and digested fully, unlike the lunch you are bolting down, what does bolting down mean? Okay, if you have a short lunch period, very limited time to eat, typically you eat so fast you really don't taste your food. We don't get knowledge that way. It doesn't come quickly. We have to take the time to truly study, to consider things. So what this is saying here is that knowledge must be eaten or taken in carefully and digested fully. So it needs to go in slowly and take the time to put the pieces together so that you begin to build that knowledge base. So the theme of that quote is you must learn new things slowly and thoughtfully. Now, we already know that obviously the tool or the power of a tool lies in its user fits with the next quotation, but let's look at this quote and see why. Maybe the sword does have some magic. Personally, I think it's the warrior who wields it. Well, when you look at the theme, the power of a tool lies in its user, let's consider the quote. What can a sword do if it's not being used by someone? Maybe hanging on the wall, it could be a nice conversation piece, a nice decoration. But will a sword cut anything if it's not being used by someone? Maybe a freak accident, something happens and the sword falls off the wall and falls down on someone, maybe. But that's not the point. The point is that the warrior who wields the sword is the one who really taps into the sword's power. So the power of a tool lies in its user. All right, let's look at one more example, and then we will close out this lesson. Let's look at our quotations. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood. Our next quotation, there are the trees. They're always listening. Most of them are on our side, but there are trees that will betray us to her. Now, what themes match each quote? So first, it can be hard to know whom to trust. Which quotation seems to support that particular theme? Well, if you look at the second quotation, it says, there are trees that will betray us to her. Betray what? Betray trust. So based on the information provided, we know that the theme here is it can be hard to know whom to trust. So the thrill of exploration can be powerful, matches the first quotation. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood. So she was a little frightened, but it says she was inquisitive and excited. What does that mean? Well, why was she inquisitive and excited? She's walking through the woods. She is exploring. So the thrill of exploration can be